be discussing how I have dealt with some GPS system malfunctions, and then also how I would deal with some system malfunctions if I were put in specific situations. So as we've learned in this course, the G1000 has two screens. The PFD shows us our flight instruments and is our main focus when flying, and then the MFD gives us information about our engine, fuel, and also is going to provide us the moving map to show us where we are and where other traffic around us is. So when working properly, these two screens provide valuable data to not only make the cockpit more organized, but also just to help us as pilots ensure that we are conducting each flight in the safest way possible. Luckily, I have not had any real GPS malfunctions while in the air, but it's something that we train for pretty frequently throughout my flight training. For me, one of the harder malfunctions that we practiced was a complete PFD failure. Although the solution to this failure was pretty easy, just gotta press the red display backup button, and it'll shift all the information over to the MFD. It was difficult for me because you had to look at the MFD rather than the PFD. So we mostly did these types of failures during my instrument training, and which obviously you're not going to have the visual references that you normally would on a VFR flight. And the biggest thing about flying in instrument conditions is keeping a proper scan of all your instruments. And like we have learned previously, the G1000 makes that scan fairly easy, just since all the instruments are centrally located on the PFD. So if the PFD fails, it does get more difficult to have an efficient scan when you're looking at the MFD. The picture on this slide shows what it looks like when using the MFD as a display backup. Although the flight instruments are all in a similar spot than what you were used to on the PFD, our scan does change quite a bit. The biggest difference is we have to look over at the screen rather than looking straight ahead. Second, the displays are slightly smaller due to the moving map being in the corner, and then the engine instruments and information on the left side there. Flying an instrument approach with a display like this is obviously doable. In a situation where your PFD fails, this is a pretty ideal backup plan, but it is a little bit more of a challenge than what you might normally expect. So looking at some different scenarios other people have experienced with GPS, I found that losing a GPS signal was fairly common. Mainly a few years back. I think they kind of fixed that issue more recently. But one pilot described his or her experience by saying that they were shooting a GPS approach and they got a loss of signal message. It would pop up for about 10 to 15 seconds numerous times throughout the approach. So the pilot explained that this approach was being conducted in VFR weather, so there was no real threat to navigation, so they were okay. But it did make me think, like, what would happen if this was an actual IFR conditions. Doing some more reading, I learned that other pilots that experienced this type of malfunction reverted to other methods of navigation, and some even asked ATC for navigational help. Neither one of those alternatives would be ideal, especially in a situation where another type of approach isn't available. Some airports only have GPS approaches, or their ILS approaches might be out, or have NOTAMs for whatever. So relying on ATC for navigational help would only be a solution for so long, and that would be putting a lot of trust in someone that isn't in the airplane and can only see you on a screen. If I did find myself in this situation, I would hope that the conditions were good enough to just shoot a visual approach, kind of like that first example we had. But if necessary, I would ask ATC to help me set up for an ILS approach, whether that means that they had to vector me somewhere different for that same airport, or if they had to completely divert me to another airport that has an ILS approach. Having a GPS failure or any type of failure in flight can be a scary form of adversity that we as pilots train for often. Just like in flying, we experience adversity in just about every aspect of life. A verse from 1 Peter chapter 5 says, "And the God of all grace, who called you to this eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast." This verse reminds me that no matter what type of adversity I'm facing, God is going to guide me through it, and once I've gotten through it, I will have learned lessons and grown stronger from the situation.